Hello and welcome to another episode of the Yachting Brief, a podcast where I'm talking to industry experts about where they've been and where they're heading next. Now, before I introduce my very next guest, I'm going to ask you, the listener, do you think your brand is doing enough to stand out? And if you're not sure how that looks, head to my website or give me a message at hello@studiovoyage.co.uk. Now, my very next guest, I'm really excited to speak to, Miles, who I will give an introduction to, is doing something very different in our industry. It's elevating brands in a different way entirely. So we'll get into that. Miles Cantley is the founder of Viveur, a studio specialising in architectural fragrancing for luxury brands and interiors. By harnessing the power of scent and memory, Miles creates a unique sensory experience that deepens client relationships and elevates brand value. Hello and welcome.
Thank you, Kate. Great to be here. And yes, that was a cool introduction, so I appreciate that.
You can have that to take home with you. So we'll start off with where this kind of all started for you and a bit of a background on yourself.
Sure. So yeah, it started, I was in a family business doing air conditioning, believe it or not, and decided that was quite dull and tedious and wanted to find ways to kind of make it a bit more interesting and really a bit more emotionally driven because it was quite technical, quite engineering-y. And I was probably unconsciously looking for ways to make it a bit more interesting. So came across the concept of perfuming the air in principle, was introduced to a master perfumer and started looking into it and became absolutely fascinated with how deeply it impacts us as humans and how really we underrate it as part of our experience. There's a really fascinating stat to me that was done, I think probably during the COVID pandemic actually, when the study of teenagers was done. And the conclusion they came up with is that teenagers would rather lose their phone than their sense of smell, which I thought was fascinating, because it's kind of a microcosm of why we kind of underrate the whole really important piece of our sensory experience as humans is our sense of smell. But it's really deeply in the subconscious, and that uncovering the subconscious was what I think really fascinated me in it as a subject. So that's kind of how I started looking into it and getting a bit deeper into it and how it's completely missing in our discussion, certainly around marketing, but lots of other subjects as well.
Yeah, of course. I totally agree. And when you said about the phone thing, that is absolutely fascinating because you just think, they're so obsessed with their phones. Well, they must be so obsessed with smell. And at the time when you started to discover this, was there anyone else kind of thinking about this, like as a industry within a niche? So it's like a niche within a niche. How does that look in terms of other people, or is this something that you're really developing with yourself?
Yeah, well, what I quite quickly observed is that the fragrance industry is divided into two sections. The vast majority of it is around personal fragrances. So that's the kind of fragrance that you would put on yourself to smell good. But the subsection we were concentrating on is what we refer to as ambient fragrancing, which is how to make a space smell good. So that's quite an important divide. There's legislation that governs it differently. So, for example, what you are allowed to put on your skin and what you're allowed to put into the air is a completely different discussion. So that the two industries are quite different. A lot of the perfumers do work across both sectors, but they are quite fundamentally different things. But what we observed really is that hardly anybody is doing it from, there's people doing it from what they call scent marketing perspective, but what it's focused on is making a space smell nice, which I detest because it's so dull and it's such a small subsection of what we want to experience as humans. And when you look at it from the luxurious perspective, the high-end perspective, then that is not good enough. Making a smell nice is just, that's not where it's at. What I observed in kind of shaping our proposition to the marketplace is that if you start looking at marketing from a sensory perspective rather than assuming that it's all visual without even realizing you're assuming it's all visual, when you start looking at it from a sensory perspective and you realize that there's other aspects that you can bring in, the whole field of thought process and discussion opens right out. And it becomes a much more interesting discussion when you think about it through that lens. So that's the missing bit to me, is looking at marketing as a field from the sensory perspective, rather than just like it's visual only, which then leads you into digital. And one of our sayings in the business is analog is better than digital. And it's kind of, that's part of human interaction. It's part of what makes our brains go. It's part of what makes us actually human, is the ability to go non-digital. So yeah, we really like to push things that we can't measure. That's another thing that really frustrates me about the marketing industry is we're obsessed with things we can measure versus things that make a difference, but we can't put a number on. So yeah,
You have just said so many things there that just went in my brain, ping ping, ping 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 ping. So I've got to try and dissect this now because you've obviously got so much passion and it shows. So how long have you been doing Viveur first, which we'll start with?
yeah,
How long?
okay. I started off in 2018 was when I first went to Monaco and started talking to people about it. So relatively young. I say that, and we've been in it a few years now. But yeah, that was the point at which I started to think, well, okay, this is a sub niche in its own right that deserves the time kind of going into it.
Absolutely. So you went in 2018, and what was the reception like when you first went there? Did people understand what you were doing? Because, you know, if you've got a creative brain, this makes sense. Like to me, this totally makes sense. But also, I understand on the other side of that and had experiences in boardrooms and worked with people. And I remember coming out, and a creative director said, you know, that they can't imagine, they might be like the fanciest of finances kind of board directors, but they couldn't imagine a square inside of a circle. So people's brain works differently. So how was this initially, you know, taken on when you went in 2018?
Yeah, and great question. So the answer to that is that everybody thinks it's a great idea, but moving to the next step is much harder, which
Okay,
is
of course.
which is kind of what you've said. So what we've found is that because it's hard to measure, it's hard to then compare with other things they could be doing. And of course, it's the whole discussion around brand versus performance marketing to an extent, a sort of subsection of that. Because if you can measure it and you know you can get results from it, it's an easy calculation. It's an easy ratio. It might be wrong. You know, it might not be the best thing they can do, but at least they know they're right. And it's kind of them fighting their fear of failure in a way, because they want to rather be sure that they can get a small result than have a go at doing something a bit more interesting. And of course, bluntly, the other thing about the yachting market is that it's super risk averse and super conservative, which is interesting. It's not how it presents itself, but it's nonetheless true. And everybody agrees. I've never heard anybody say that it's not. And I should give a shout out to some various different companies here, because what I observe is that Dutch super yacht companies tend to be the most forward thinking. So we've had really good discussions with a couple of the big Dutch builders who are, in comparison to a lot of the rest of the market, they're very forward thinking, and that's a trait of the whole country, I observe. So it's not, I don't want to tar the whole industry with the same brush, but in general, the fear of doing something that doesn't work kind of makes people quite reticent. So I'd say that people in general love the idea, but they're not always sure how to apply it. And that becomes an education piece for us, is to kind of lay out the steps and make it make sense for them. So that's been a process for us, and I would say we've pivoted. We've done a few mini pivots, kind of a few different times, because the reception has always been great, but the next action hasn't always flowed like coherently from there. So that's down to us to kind of move that process forward in steps that work for them, really.
Yeah, and I think you've identified really clearly there the difference between like brand and marketing. I think I see a lot this label of, oh, I'm marketing, this is what I do. But there's such a piece in yachting, which is, you know, where you're getting to, that people don't see, is the emotional side of it that you can definitely like do more on. And I think that's a massive part in the travel sector in general, that people can lean into, which is, I think we're getting there. The conversations I'm having are definitely, people seem like, I understand the whole piece about risk averse, but there's also like a new generation of people coming in being like, there's also another generation of people who are on board these yachts now. So there's an opportunity to find these things to do better, which is what you're obviously like tapping into. And, you know, it's a very powerful tool. Like I can think of so many examples in my head right now of stores that I go to, and it like triggers something in my brain. I've been on airplanes before and smell to smell and thought of a memory like 10 years back and thought, oh my gosh, like I forgot about this, that person, that smell I can remember. So it's quite interesting that if you can try and link that to a particular boat, a particular holiday, I think it's really powerful. And I when I saw what you were doing, I really I loved the storytelling piece in it. I was like, this is brilliant.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of another palette to paint the story on. And there's a reason why it's so powerful in terms of memory formation. And that is because the nerves in your nose go into the part of the brain which is called the amygdala. And that part of the brain is the part that forms emotions and memories. And interestingly, it doesn't go, all of the other senses apart from the smell go through what they call a relay center in the brain. So they're mediated in some way, but the smell sense goes straight to the center of the brain. So there is no mediation, and it is so fast. So you make a judgment based on a smell before you even recognize what the smell is. That's how deep it is in our psyche. So using it as a marketing tool, especially for an emotional sale, 100% makes sense. But again, you're back to the measurement piece. It's not always easy to identify or clarify for marketing managers and brand managers how valuable that is for them. But if you get something distinctive to yourself, and we'll get into how we can do this, if you design a custom fragrance that is known to be yours and you use it as a brand asset in as many different locations of the customer journey as you can, that becomes something that is instantly powerful. And you've just kind of sketched out for yourself how it works in a retail setting. You go into a store and you're in their world straight away, and you're in a mindset at that point. And if the store has been intelligent about building up that mindset in you so that you're in the right place to buy something, there's your ROI straight away.
Yeah.
So it's building up that positive association between the fragrance and the experience, which if you apply that in the charter market scenario, of course, that's a trigger to rebook on the charter and go back to the same vessel. So yeah, the power of it is absolutely undoubted, but it's mapping that out for the brand managers is what we find is our that's kind of our marketing challenge of our own.
Yeah, of course. And I see the value of, like, I'm just still thinking, like, when the bakeries on the high street, is that a myth that they pump the smell out into the street, or is that not a thing? Have I made that up?
No, you haven't made it up. There's definitely some people that do that, but a lot of people, they wouldn't even need to do that because they're doing the cooking on site anyway. So they've got the fragrance, they've got the smell. All they need to do is pump it out onto the street. They don't need to fabricate anything because it's already there. If they're actually doing the baking on site, yeah, you're away to the races. You don't need to do anything else. It's right there.
So is there any examples of things that you've been up to that are really good case studies for sensory marketing?
Yeah, sure. So the one that stands out to me is a project we did with a company called Immersive Gym. So this is a really cool concept in its own right. So what they do is they have a projector onto 3 sides of the room, and then they have gym equipment in the center of the room, and then they project onto the 3 sides in front of you with the gym equipment a relevant scene for the gym activity you're undertaking. So you're rowing down the Thames, or you're cycling down the Riviera, or whatever you're doing. And in the process of that, we then put the fragrances that are relevant to that same scenario in through the system so that they're experiencing something across it's a multi-sensory experience.
That's so cool.
That is so cool. You're in a way to the scenario that you're experiencing whilst undertaking the exercise at the same time. So it achieves a lot of different things in one go, and that's a brilliant example of where it elevates the experience completely. It's transformative in terms of what it feels like. You couldn't measure it, but it's absolutely on another level in terms of how good the experience is because the fragrance matches the visuals. So getting that alignment, the holistic alignment of the different experiences together, is when it really, really works. And it makes something properly complete, properly holistic, in a way that just one of those things by themselves doesn't work in the same way.
Oh, if you've got a case study for that, absolutely send it to me, because I'd love to link that to this podcast for people to see. I think when you've got an example of something so powerful,
yeah,
it's just exciting. Like, people should be excited that people are doing these, because essentially we're also in this era now where people we're not paying for things, isn't it? It's experience that our generation and younger are having. And I think that you start adding all these little extra layers and you can't come out on the other side of it. It's just a really exciting time to be part of anything brand. So I can't wait to see that myself. Never mind listeners. That's really exciting.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah.
It's sorry, just on that point, because it's a really important point. Really, the yachts of the future, if you could classify them in such a way, they're platforms for experience, aren't they? And they always have been to an extent. But I think people, especially outside the marketplace, have a perception that they're just this big glitzy thing. And of course, that's true to an extent. But you're actually giving clients a platform to enjoy their life in a different way and experience something special. So understanding it like an experience platform where you're giving people the ability to build something for themselves, if you like, is a much nicer way to look at it rather than just seeing it as some sort of Daily Mail like gin palace. Looking at it as an experience platform is a much better way to think about the design of it, let alone feeling like it's a good thing to do. It just kind of puts it on a different level where it brings in all the senses in a way. Whereas if it's a thing that's only rich people have that's unobtainable, that feeds into the problem that we have as an industry, which is it feels like it's ripe for the extinction rebellions of this world. So I think it's a good direction for the industry to go in on a strategic level anyway, to think of itself as an experience platform, because it's just a much healthier way to regard everything. So yeah, I think that point that the whole world is moving towards experiences is 100% true. And I think we could do with thinking about that a bit more ourselves anyway in the marketplace.
And also that we're tapping way more into emotion than we ever did. So I did a podcast and that'll be released, and maybe before this one, but with a lady called Elise Chapara, and Elise works for Joro, which is very luxury travel, amazing company. And she said that one of the questions she asks her clients, because these are very busy people, they're very influential people, is, when did you feel at peace? Now my head goes back to this and I'm okay, well, if you could link a fragrance to a trip that they felt at peace, and then you follow up with this lovely something that's got this scent on it, or they can take that scent home, you've immediately tapped into that emotion of this extremely incredible trip. Like the trips that they do were incredible. But if you can tie that all together, and I know there's a part of it that is salesy and it is more money orientated, but also like, you mustn't forget that these are people that you've given an experience to. That's the bit that I can see both sides of with being crew. So absolutely, these people are the wealthiest of the wealthiest, but they're still, I had a fortunate position where they were always very kind people, and I only ever wanted to give the best service. So why can't you make that last longer with something like a product like this? I think it's just really valuable. Definitely.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the other thing to remember is that everybody has a completely unique fragrance journey. One thing that means something to somebody will mean something totally different to somebody else. So again, that comes back to this experience platform. What you're doing is you're helping people to fix the memory of that quality charter experience they've had, the experience of being at peace or relaxed or whatever adjective you choose to use. You're giving them, if you like, summarizing that experience for them in a fragrance.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's a really powerful way to build up that quality memory. So yeah, it's a fixing
Another
tool
layer.
in that sense to just kind of bring it into a single experience, and then the capability of fragrance to re-trigger that feeling again is where the marketing value comes.
Yeah, absolutely,
So
of course.
What we always recommend charter clients to do is to take that fragrance they've got on board and then give it as a gift, a parting gift to the client when they leave, because of course that's your remarketing capability. That's where you get the ROI. Is being able to, the client being able to go back to their kitchen or their lounge or whatever it is, spray that fragrance and remember that feeling of being at peace, and then they know where to come back for it. So that's the use of fragrance as a tool in that way to help them build that quality experience and then be able to re-trigger it is where we see the power of it, really.
Absolutely. So in the timeline of things, where maybe we start at the beginning. So how does this get developed? How do you work on this? And then the end being that it's delivered. So we'll go through the manufacturing process and things. So let's start at the beginning. How are you developing these smells? Are you going directly to a boat? Is it a vessel? Is it an owner? Like, give me some examples of where that starting position looks.
Yeah, sure. So it depends where we're brought in on the process, because sometimes, for example, I got a message yesterday from somebody who says, I'm developing a brand in such and such a country. We're really early on in the brand process, but we want a fragrance to go with it. So I said to them, okay, send me the brand visuals, see what we can do. And they're like, we don't have anything. We're right at the beginning. So we need to have a face-to-face conversation to understand what's the perspective of that brand. Where are they coming from? What's the starting point? Let alone what the products are. That might even come later, but what's your positioning to start with? But that's unusual because a lot of the time we get drawn in much later on in the process, maybe when there's a completely finished interior, for example. So we offer a service. One of the services we offer is what we call ambience profiling. So we'll go to a luxury residential place, or we'll go to a boat or retail store or whatever, and we'll literally just walk around and experience it for ourselves. So take in what the customer experience is from the customer's perspective. And then we'll talk to the brand custodians, if there's brand custodians, or we'll talk to the interior managers, stewardesses who are actually looking after that space. And we'll understand how it's used in practice and how people actually experience it. And we'll build up a fragrance profile from that point. So it's all about, how do you want people to feel at the beginning, whether it's a brand or whether it's an interior? What feeling are you trying to generate? That's always the starting point. And then we work up from there. So typically the ambience profiling service is, we'll use a portfolio of standard fragrances that we already have, and we'll say, okay, here's a microcosm of your spaces in these 4, 6, 2 fragrances. Here's the story behind it. Take them away, experiment with them. We'll train them how to use the fragrances in the space, just in a spray bottle form. Get them to experiment. Get them on the journey of using fragrance to start with, because that's what we find. People are just used to buying mass market brands. They don't know any better.
Yeah.
So giving them something that's a bit more customized, let them play with it, let them get into it. And then they come back and say, okay, that's great, but I want a different type of scent in this and this direction, or this and this direction. Or I want a machine so I don't have to worry about spraying it in the space. And that's the start of the journey. So the ambience profiling service is where it all begins, really. And the beginning of that is us taking in the experience of what already exists, and then understanding how they're trying to present themselves to their clients. And then everything gets built on layer by layer from that point.
It's funny from my side. So when I do a brand discovery with clients, I'll sit with them, and it's all face to face or Zoom to Zoom. And I ask them questions, and you ask them the general questions like, what do you look and feel? What are you inspired by? And then I kind of turn into these questions, and some of them really get it, and other people think, oh my goodness. And one of them I do ask is, if you were a smell, how do you want your space to smell? So we did a Pilates studio in Australia, 2 women, and they immediately said eucalyptus. Like, that was it. They knew immediately, without even being, that was what their scent was. And to be fair, what we've come up with, although I will not go into the space it's currently being built, when I eventually get over there, I can imagine it fully being that smell. And we were kind of discussing, well, maybe when you do your gift cards and things, it's eloped in all of that. And these questions really spark something in people. And obviously, now knowing the science, that's exactly how it works. So you obviously did the discovery, and I'm doing that at one end as well, which is really exciting. So you've done your discovery, and then in the middle, where's the middle bit sit? So you've chosen your fragrances, and is this you developing the fragrances, or are you out to a manufacturer? How does that look?
Yeah, sure. It depends. Again, it depends what they want, because sometimes they don't want to develop anything customized, because the customized process does, it's a little bit like building a super yacht in a sense. It's a process that takes time. It involves lots of experts. It's not a simple process, but you can get to something that really epitomizes the interior or the brand through doing that. People have to make a decision whether they want something customized or whether they want a combination of fragrances that already exist. But once that pathway is chosen, then it will be about how the space gets used. If it's standard fragrances, so we'll map out the customer journey. We'll find all the different places which fragrance could make an impact, and then we'll apply it. So whether that's sprays or whether it's machines built into the space, which is a particular skill of ours because of the air conditioning background, we obviously understand how air moves in a space, which therefore impacts how fragrance moves in a space. So that's important.
Clever, very clever.
Yeah, so that's the kind of tie-in with air conditioning, and I'll come back to that in a sec. But on the customized side of things, what we'll do is we'll take all those learnings from actually going into the space, going into the interior and feeling it for ourselves. We'll understand where they want to apply it in terms of customer journey, and how they want the clients to feel. And then we'll take all those learnings away, and we map that onto an olfactory diagram. So olfactory is the word for sense of smell. The olfactory nerve is the nerve that carries all the information from the nose to the brain. So that's what the word means. But then we'll take that information and we'll come back to them with a whole subset of fragrance references. And typically what I mean by that is there'll be plants that convey a certain smell. So we'll start to build up the profile of what could go into the fragrance. For example, say we took a Dutch shipyard, for the sake of argument, and they were in a particular location which is known for a particular kind of plant. Obviously, Holland, your immediate association is tulips. So you pick some location references, or you'd pick some color references that connect with the emotion you're trying to evoke. You'll pick a whole load of different references from other senses, maybe, and you'll compile a whole matrix of what you want the client to feel and how you can impact that. There's another really clever tool called brandpalette.com, which was developed within Imperial College London by a guy I know. And what they do is they take the visual design of a brand and they map it across 60 core emotional needs that all people have. And it will,
Cool.
I'll send you a map of that because it would be fascinating for you as well.
Yeah.
What it is, each particular brand, by virtue of its visual design, appeals to certain core emotional needs. And it will automatically generate a heat map of which emotional needs are being sparked by the visual design of that company. Okay.
Well, that's clever. I like that.
Yeah,
that's really clever.
So that brand mapping process, looked at from an emotional point of view, is what then gives us the basis to build up those fragrance references. And then we put it all together and come back with a fragrance design or 2 or 3. Then we'll go back to the client for some feedback on how that makes them feel. And then we can obviously do tweaks from there. But the customization process involves a huge amount of data gathering. And that's not only data in a sort of ones and zeros sense, but it's a experience, emotion, how do I feel sense? How does the client feel sense? And then we weave it all together into a fragrance, which is the kind of end design of the process. So there's lots and lots of just collecting, just how does it feel? How does it feel? Because the emotion is what you're trying to drive. And once you're into the application phase, then you use that fragrance to use it as consistently as you possibly can in order to build up those positive experiences. And then that becomes if you like, a multi-year process of turning that fragrance into a brand asset, because that's the purpose of it at the end of the day. And if it's not for a brand, if it's for an interior, then the guys on the ground will actually explore with the different fragrances and what really works for the principal on the boat or in the apartment or wherever it would happen to be. And then typically what happens is it gets rolled out to other locations because, of course, these clients, they're all over the place. They have different places all over the globe. And sometimes they want a consistent fragrance experience in all their different places. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they want to feel different. But if another cool example is if coming home always feels the same to them, so they've always got coming home, wherever it is, home has a smell, and they come home and wherever they are, they can just not home. And that experience is an absolutely universal one. Everybody knows what it's like to come home. So turning that experience, that feeling, into a smell that can be applied anywhere and everywhere, if that's what the client wants, is also really powerful. So it's a long process of really understanding what the client wants, but it can start super simple.
Yeah, of course.
And it's kind of important to make it simple because otherwise it becomes overwhelming, and see how it works for you.
I have a very vivid memory that's like running through my head now, and it's the last vessel I worked on as a 72-meter, and the head of house just running through before we picked up guests, spraying this perfume bottle, and it was like you knew that's like almost the smell of pickup day, because it was just getting ran through the interior onto everything.
That was a buzz in its own right, kind of thing.
Yeah, it did feel like a buzz. Now I'm speaking about it. It was good fun.
Yeah, but I'd like to give the guys and girls on board, make it a bit more strategic, so it's not a last minute thing, because that's the thing that frustrates me about this a lot, is that you're picking up something from a retail store and it's the last 5 minutes you're going spritz, 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 spritz. But you wouldn't do that for any other part of the space. You think about it with so much more intention further back. So if we can deliver something for a vessel like that, where we can say, look, this is what works for this space because of the materials and because of how the client uses this space. this is the smell, this is the particular fragrance that works for this space.
Yeah.
Use that one, be strategic about it, and then you don't have to have the same thing everywhere. You can zone it. You could do lots of different things with it, with different fragrances on the same project. So that level of strategy, helping people, almost training them as how to think about it, then gives them an extra tool in terms of how to set up that space really well for the principal. Because that last minute feeling, I'd kind of love to give you the ability to break out of that last minute feeling, because it shouldn't be like that.
Yeah. No, I understand. I think obviously given that we had no strategy in this or any training, it's like you say, that would be the benefit of making it not that rush thing. But that is, you're saying you're linking it to a sensory experience. That is my experience. And, maybe there's something in that should be around actually should be a calming smell, because the crew, like the impact of the crew and the heightened adrenaline, like is that whole thing about, crew behavior as well,
Yep. Yep.
behind the scenes, is trying to calm the mood down and keep people level when things are really under the pump as well.
Of course.
So,
It
I can,
always gets
yeah,
like that. Yeah, it's always going to be
yeah,
like that. It's a high stress environment. There would be a case for putting a calming fragrance into the crew areas if you did nothing else at all.
yeah,
Just to give the crew a happy place to retreat back into as a kind of recharge before they go back into the maelstrom, as it were. There's lots and lots of different ways to apply it. But from your point of view, coming from the crew side, what would you feel like would really work for you? What would you instantly grab as a service or a product? What would make sense to you coming from the place you're coming from? Because for me, it's very easy to sit back and say, well, you should be doing this, this, and this, but that doesn't necessarily work for you in the scenario you're in. So I guess that's a thing that I'd like to do some more exploration with, is what would fit into your processes in the best way, even if it's only a starting point.
yeah. No, absolutely. I think a lot of, and what I find is often yachts as a whole aren't necessarily treated, and again, I will not tar the whole industry with the same brush, but they're not necessarily treated as businesses. So this is something that always blew my mind from behind the scenes, because I'd done brand experience and worked in luxury brands before, and then I went yachting. That was my background. So whilst I was on board, I was like, whoa, we're missing so many things. Why are we missing so many things? This is a business. And I always worked on charter boats. So I was like, why are we not pushing the boundaries to increase tips, to, our returning guests, all these things. And a lot of it came down to time, if I'm honest. So much of it was like you were just on your feet constantly. So menu designs were rushed, and there were spelling mistakes, which for me just blew my mind as somebody who had spent my entire life real proofreading, or things were just amiss. And I think a lot of people just thought, oh, right, these people will never notice the finer details and the experience, like you're saying, but time was never of the essence. So I think if you can introduce something, like your product service in shipyard where people have more time, and it's when the chief stews are relying more on their juniors to really develop things themselves. It's often when they're given time to, do the tablescapes a little bit nicer. They've got time to experience more themed nights. That's the time it gets done, because when you're in season, you're literally just implementing these things. So a lot of what I'm doing is like, okay, well, what can you do in the downtime?
Totally, yeah. It's far too late. And again, if you've got a few different fragrances to draw from, so you've got a kind of palette on board that you know how to use for different scenarios, then again, you've got so much more flexibility. The downside of a built-in machine, is that it has that fragrance in it. You can change the fragrance out, but it's not as easy as just changing to a different fragrance bottle. So there's advantages and disadvantages of both. From the time point of view, being able to press the button on the wall and the space is fragrance is perfect, because that's looked after for you. But in the experimentation of getting the guys on board into it as a concept, I think having the flexibility to play around with it themselves is probably a better way to start. And that's kind of how we put the ambience profiling concept together. The other thing I would mention also is that as part of our standard fragrances, right? I mean, the standard fragrances that we've got, there's an enormous number of them. But what we've done is we've piled them into themes. So we've got a thing which we call collection, and we've got 8 different theme types. And those theme types are based around who might be using the space, or what you want to feel like in the space, or what the space is. not just saying this is Scotch pine. We're saying this is a theme which may be based around how you want to feel. I can convey how I feel about it. I can convey some of my passion for it, but I can also look around the space and make suggestions and use our engineering experience of how to understand how the air moves in this specific space. We can map the air movement for them, and that's a manual they can refer back to, so they know where to spray in the room, and it spreads to the rest of the room. So all of that engineering experience also becomes of value in the training side as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different things we can offer, but how to position it is something that I'm still working on, always.
So many aspects to it. And I think you touched on something there about, these different themes. And when I hear the word theme, I think about, the themes on the tables. That's what my head went to. And in the charter industry, we've also made a rod for our own backs in a way, because as boats, we're constantly competing to do better. If one vessel's done this charter night, you try and do it, or you're going to have the next guest, so you find out what they've done. And I think we're at a point where level yachting is, especially charter, is at such a high place. Anything that can elevate it further. So, I've got visions of like when we do Moroccan evenings, I'm imagining like an oudi smell that would go with it. And, you're linking all of this. Everything, in my opinion, can be done better. I mean, I worked for David Brailsford in a cycling team, and everything was marginal gains. Everything can be done that 1% better. And I find that again, time constraints and the things we've obviously spoken to before, it's down to time, but it's also, there's an opportunity for really good planning that will essentially elevate any guest experience. So I think if people can tap into that and, treat this as a business and treat it as a very, a real opportunity to do better, there's no reason why a product like yours isn't part of that. And it absolutely should be, in so many ways, like in all the offerings that you're bringing. Definitely. I completely get it.
I think we've focused quite a lot on the machine diffusion before, and the machine diffusion has some advantages because it's completely pure oil. So there's no alcohol in the oils that get diffused into the air. And of course, when you're using a machine, as long as you deliver it, that is completely pure, and it's so easy to administer because it's just the press of a button. You can do it on phone. It's super easy. The time involvement is absolutely minimal. But that involves an installation cost, and it's better to experiment first with the sprays just to get comfortable with the concept as an interior team, and then move on up the chain rather than trying to do everything at once. So what we advise is just to play with it, because it's such a fun subject. Get into it, and then you find that it's worth doing, and it makes an impact. It makes a real impact to the charter guest experience, and then the floor is yours. You become an artist in your own right in another form of decoration. It's just olfactive architecture is another expression that perfumer uses. So you're creating a building in the air, as it were. You're creating something special. You can even mix different fragrances in different scenarios. Journey as they move around the room. So the floor is yours in terms of what you can do on the creative side. It's just about giving you guys the tools, really.
Yeah, and you're obviously so passionate about it, and I think that is what makes it really exciting as well. Like I can see like how like you're getting. I don't, like obviously anyone listening to this can't see Miles right now, but you're so enthusiastic, and I think that is what this industry needs. We have a lot of people doing the same things in the same ways because that's always how it's been done. But there's an opportunity here for people to really, elevate and really engage in these new opportunities. So yeah, everyone should definitely look at what Miles is doing and think more about the experience you're giving your guests. It's not just a trip, it's a real opportunity to do more, especially in the hospitality sector. In any area, you wouldn't expect to go into a luxury brand. This is what drives me slightly crackers. You wouldn't expect to go into a brand like Louis Vuitton, and I'm trying to think of all the ones on the high street in Monaco, actually, Gucci, you name it, all of these brands, and it not smell delightful. This is the caliber we're dealing with, and you're spending essentially more on a yacht. So treat it like that.
Of course you are. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's that experience platform. The thing that the retail brands have done really, really well is they've built up their own world, and you go through the door and you're into their world, and they're controlling aspects of the experience. Same thing for a charter yacht. So at the end of the day, the sense of smell is one of our 5 primary senses. If we're not being intentional about how we design that part of the experience, that's a massive gap. And because we're so visually focused, it's easy to forget that piece, but it's so impactful when you use it well.
Yeah. And I don't know your thoughts on this, but it would be interesting to see what you think. So in my head, just because experiential design always has, the opportunity to do collaborations with larger brands and luxury brands that have their own scent anyway. Obviously, there's a part of this is really creating something personal, but there is an opportunity to link with other brands and cross collaborate over projects, whether that be a scent or something, whether they come on for a certain event, whether that be Monaco Grand Prix. Like, I really think that these luxury brands should be tapping more into yachting as a whole. I've always
Yes.
felt like that's slightly missing.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's coming now. You've got Louis Vuitton sponsoring like the F1 suitcases on the trophies and things like that. It's really happening, and there's some really exciting things happening. But I just think, especially with something so good like this, and you're saying you can develop something so personal, but also you have your own sense and things. There's all this work that can be done and to really elevate it.
I completely agree that brand collaborations are an unexplored kind of subsection of the yachting sector. I think there's lots more that could be done. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, Fedship is owned by LVMH, obviously, so that they're part of the huge LVMH portfolio. But there's undoubtedly more that could be done, and it's such a field for creative endeavor just on its own. It's not specifically what we're talking about. Us as a business, we're talking about ambience fragrancing, so making spaces feel good, and that's just as fruitful a field because it's so underutilized. Again, it's about creating a brand world like the retail houses do, and putting some really quite big names together would have advantages for both, because again, it's about creating that experience that people don't forget.
Yeah.
I was really fascinated when LVMH purchased that villa in Cannes. Did you see that on the news recently?
No, but I'm totally intrigued.
La Bagatelle, I think it's called.
Okay.
They bought it for, I think, 50 million euros. And the purpose of that is for them to create brand events in a totally controlled environment.
So
this is my point. It's really clever. It's about being able to bring the customer in to your own, you're completely controlling all aspects of the environment, including the smell, of course. Bring them into your world and then make how they feel and giving them a really, really positive experience that they remember. I don't want to do some of the big yacht shows down, but isn't that so much better than tramping the aisles with everyone else?
Yeah, really clever.
From the branding perspective, create something unique that you can invite them to, where you're dealing with all aspects of the sensory experience. Then you're bringing them into a new world, and that as a marketing proposition is so much more powerful than just social media, just digital. Think about it from a sensory perspective. It just opens up the field so hugely.
Absolutely. So what have you got going on at the moment? So we spoke about where you've been and how you're doing it. So what's next for Viveur? What's next for you, Miles?
I think for us, it's really quite recent that we started looking at the branding side. So up to now, we've been relatively focused on the luxury interiors for the private individuals. But there's so many powerful, this really goes to your point about collaborations, there's so many powerful ways in which the technology can be applied to the branding space because of the fact that everything is going experiential. So retail, especially the high-end retail, they do this quite well already. But hospitality, I think, are a bit more stuck in the mindset of just a nice smell will do. So I came across a consultant the other day, was a hospitality consultant, talking to me about a particular place he'd been to in Switzerland. And he said they have a water bar with 35 options of water that you could choose from. Other 35 sparkling water options, but they have no fragrance options. So where's the sense in that?
Who needs that many bottles of water?
Well, they've all got some highly interesting things in their own right, but that's kind of going to extreme in one area. And you're missing out one of the 5 primary senses. There's in hospitality in particular. There's some really cool ideas that a strategy agency gave me a little while ago. They were working with one of the big Middle Eastern brands. They had was when the client checks into the hotel, they choose between 4 or 5 different fragrance options at the desk, and by the time they get into the room is already perfumed. That one they've chosen.
So clever.
So clever.
So clever.
That's what I mean by building it into the customer journey. When you've mapped out how the customer actually experiences your brand, this is this question, is that putting it into a brand context gives so many interesting fields for exploration and building out that customer journey and mapping out how they come to you and how they feel when they get there.
Yeah, you've already done the legwork before it starts.
Absolutely. And you've involved them in the process. It's collaborative. You've given them some things to choose from so they can actually feel like the space is personalized before they even walk in the door. So that is a really good example of where it works in hospitality. Build it into the experience from the beginning, intentionally, and then apply it and invite the customer on the journey with you so they can choose what they want as they go along. That really becomes meaningful for them. So doing it for brands is an area that I definitely want to explore more. That I think is a big growth area for us.
I actually think we could speak about this all day and come up with so many ideas. I really, really appreciate your time. And I'm going to ask you, where can people find you this year? Or are you going to any yacht shows or, emails and things? Tell us where you are.
Yeah, sure. So the website is viveur.co. My email address is mgc@viveur.co. So that's very easy. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn's an easy place to find me as well. Miles Guy Cantley. So that's the easiest way to get hold of me.
Amazing. And I'll link that all below. But I must thank you so much for your time. It's been so good speaking to you. And once again, the enthusiasm. And if anyone is just listening to this, please go and actually watch how excited we both are. We're both here just grinning. I've grinned the whole time on this podcast. It's been absolutely wonderful to have you, Miles. Thank you so much for coming on.
Really enjoyed it. And your questions are very insightful. And I really appreciate that because it gives me the ability to talk about my favourite subject. So that's great. Very appreciate time.
You're very welcome. Brilliant. So once again, thank you so much to Miles for coming on Yachting Brief. It's been an absolute pleasure. And if you'd like to know more, I'll leave his details below. And if you would like to get in touch with me for some brand experience help, please head to hello@studiovoyage.co.uk.